Welcome everybody to the Verts podcast. I'm your host, as always, Sonny Weaver. Alongside me today is YouTuber, EA Game Changer, and all-around just good guy, MoonlightSwami. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. So we're gonna jump into a couple different things here. Like I said, EA Game Changer, you're involved in a lot of different sporting communities, and obviously your opinion's valued by many, as you can tell from your YouTube following. EA kind of took a different approach this year. They splintered out from E3, and they did their own event, EA Play, this year. And we've gotten a lot of reviews of Madden itself from the event, but I would be curious to get your take on the event itself. I think it was a little bit of a shock to the gaming community that EA kind of pulled out of E3. What were your takes from just the event itself?
Okay, well, first off, the event was awesome because that was my first time being to anything like that. I've been to, the Penny Arcade Expo, PAX East, back in like 2012. But outside of that, I haven't really been to a gaming expo before. So this was really a whole new experience for me, I guess would be the way to put it. But the event itself was really cool because we got in there, we got our press badges, we went up the stairs, went through security, and then it was laid out, 5 different games, just lines and booths and developers walking around. And it was just a really cool experience being able to interact with the guys who helped make the game. I really couldn't put into words because obviously, though, being a game changer, I had an opportunity to interact with a lot of those developers from Madden specifically before. But for the other games, it was really interesting. Like, I got to participate in 2 UFC 2 tournaments, just something that they put on the main stage, and that was a really cool little side thing that they just decided to show in-house. And I got to talk with the developers of that game, and I had never had any interaction with them. I'd barely played UFC to begin with, but it was just so cool being able to talk with them and just pitch ideas based on our experiences, both in the tournament and in general. So as a whole, I thought the event was really cool. In its first year of existence, I think it definitely could be better. But the only thing that I would say I was disappointed about was because it was separate, I couldn't get into E3. And I really wanted to go to the Twitch booth and a few other places that were there was a big area in the middle of the square that wasn't inside any building that had a bunch of booths in it, and I would walk past it every time I'd go to the convention center and kind of longingly looked inside like, wow, I really wish I had planned ahead and got a pass for this. But outside of that, I think it was pretty good.
Yeah, so you said you got to talk with other developers. Can you kind of frame for the listeners the difference? I feel like, especially since Rex has been there, we've seen much more transparency, especially through social media, Twitter, things like that.
Yeah.
I'm not as familiar with the other development teams. Did it seem like they were as interactive? Did it feel forced from corporate, or do you think that's just a new leaf that EA's turned, that they're really just trying to reach out to the community more?
It felt very personable. The developers from UFC were just guys who loved UFC, and when you get an opportunity to talk with these guys, they talk. That's the thing about, I think, a lot of game developers across the board. Through my experiences with Sony, through my experiences with some stuff with Microsoft a few years ago, where I got to talk to the developers of games like Sunset Overdrive and even Assassin's Creed, it really seems like developers as a whole, when you get down and talk with them, they are so passionate about what they do that they'll talk and they'll listen and they'll get ideas and they'll take suggestions, and they'll really have good sit-down conversations with you. The ones that I've met, at least, have all been like that. So I don't know if it's just an EA thing or just an entirely new view on video games, that in today's era you kind of have to be a little bit more open. You have to be more personable with people. You can't just be sitting in a back room, in the quiet. I mean, there's some developers, guys who do coding, who are like that, but the guys who are working on the main modes, who have faces to names, those are the guys who, I think, when you interact with them, they are they're normal people, and they care about their product, and they know you do as well. So that's when you have some good conversations.
So that's actually a really good segue into kind of something I talked about last week. On the podcast last week, I kind of took a second to do, oh, I don't know, you can call it a rant or whatever you will, kind of about the community, right? And
Yes.
so, with openness and with transparency to the community and arm's reach contact, you tend to take a lot of venom and vitriol, and the community doesn't always give back the love that you can kind of see from the developers. And so, something I came away with post E3 was the thought that the development team took a year to kind of rip it down from the foundation and put in a lot of mechanics that aren't real splash features, but really build on the core gaming, and really improve that core gaming mechanic. And what you saw coming out of E3 was, or EA Play, I should say, is a lot of harsh criticism that the game didn't change. They didn't add enough. When people say developers cater to the casual gamer, a lot of those features were core gamer concepts. They had nothing to do with the casual gamer. So, something I proposed and put out there was, I'm not sure the gaming community actually knows what they want. It seems like a lot of times, no matter what the developers do, if they spent the whole year working on fundamentals and making it better, they'd get harsh criticism for it. But if they spent the whole year working on splash features, they'd say they forgot to fix the game that's broken in itself. So, what's your take? You deal with a lot of the community. What's kind of your take on the community as it stands right now in the Madden world?
Well, it's universal, but the idea is that the people who are angriest will always be the loudest. And from that perspective, the people who are dissatisfied with the game itself will always be the ones that are at the very top talking. The people who are happy will be quiet. It's just how it is. The people who have their fangs out and looking for flaws will always be the ones who are criticizing, no matter how good the game is. It could get a 99 on Metacritic, and they'll be like, well, it didn't get 100, even though I think only 2 or 3 games in my time actually looking, or games that I've played, actually got into that range at all. But that's an aside for a different day. But I think that you are right that the game definitely improved in a lot of areas that needed improvement. Going into last year, it was true. There were so many bugs coming from Madden 16. There were so many issues with the game on day one, and I think they've done a good job to patch it. But I also think that they're preparing to make sure that every single issue that they could possibly fix is fixed. So that's a big thing. But the idea that not enough has changed, while there are some areas that I would like to see added on and improved because they just need to be overhauled in some capacity, whether it be just adding some freshness to something like relocation or just doing something of that nature, I think the changes to gameplay are so much more substantial than people will give credit for. If you don't know football, you might not recognize as much. But for my experiences, just playing Madden 17 and going back to Madden 16, I'm so frustrated with Madden 16 because there are plays where I'll run a concept and I expect my guys to block and they don't do it. And in Madden 17, they do it. And then the same thing on the other side. I expect my run defense to get a stop here, and they give up a 30-yard gain because they didn't go to the right gaps. And it's just the amount of changes that will go under the radar for people or that they'll take for granted is very high. But I don't think that the game could have improved without them. So I'm okay with them taking a year to basically improve everything possible that was already in the game. And I think they added some nice features. I have a few concerns about some of the new gameplay mechanics, just because I feel like they're really good, but there are some areas that can be exploited that I don't want to go too much into, but I can if you want me to.
Well, yeah, let's hit on some of the things that you feel like are still there. Because what was interesting and some things you've seen from the developers, I like the new development crew for this thought. There used to be a point where when the game dropped, they would fix a bug or two that needed to be fixed, and then it was, okay, guys, we're moving on to the next one. This current development team has shown the willingness to stick with it. They were doing updates all the way through January and February this year, and so they've talked about patching in different things and not announcing certain things in the game, but they're still not saying it's not going to get there. They're waiting to see if they can get it worked out. So what are maybe some things that you still think may eventually have to get fixed?
Well, I think that deep zones are definitely a big issue in general. They're probably one of the toughest areas to cover because there are always ways to break it. And that's football, though, right? When you have four verticals, just as the name of your podcast, and you're playing cover two, what's going to happen? It's going to be broken one way or another because that safety is going to have to commit to either the seam or to the outside man. And whichever one he commits to, as soon as you see that commit, you can just fire it at the other guy. And people will say, well, that's broken. But no, that's not. That's football. But I think a lot of people don't understand the concept that there are money plays in the NFL. There are things that unless you are countering directly that play, like you are looking directly for that, it's going to work. And it's why teams are so successful at times because the Arizona Cardinals, you know what their number one play was last year?
I'm going to go with verticals.
It was deep. It was deep crossers. The play that everyone says is so cheesy, where you have the play action, you have the guys going on deep crossers at 3 different levels.
Right.
Yeah, that was their play last year. It was the most dominant play in the NFL because crossers in its own right is the hardest thing to cover. When you add a vertical stem to it, it just becomes insanely difficult, especially if you have a speedy wide receiver like you have with J.J. Nelson or John Brown, that they just turn that corner, and when you accelerate into the open field, it's literally a foot race. And if you have a quarterback who can make some good precision passing, then it's going to be caught. So unless you have a direct counter for it, then there's nothing that you can really do in those situations, just hope that they mess up. In Madden, it's a little bit difficult to get that mess up because I feel like in years past you either hit your target or it was 30 yards offline. So this year, though, I've seen a lot of near misses. So that's a good thing. But the deep zones in its own right, I think, are the hardest ones to tweak because no matter how realistic they get, people will still be unhappy, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and so something you said there is interesting, right? And you talk about, okay, well, there are money plays in the NFL, and I'm not going to argue that, but to the same extent, and this kind of gets into the whole sim, non-sim debate, and that's something maybe we'll hit a little bit later, but
yeah,
what you see happen is you will see guys peel off from other areas to try to jump it, knowing it, right? So we come to the sideline and say, hey, guys, next time you see that formation, you see them doing that, here's what we're going to do. You're going to peel off. We're going to gamble, right?
Yes.
And so we're human beings. We can make these adjustments. We can make those adjustments on the fly. The difference is, right, games have pre-programmed AI. And that pre-programmed AI, until we get to the point that we're so awesome, we can actually develop and slowly integrate things. And I know they've tried to make that, adaptive AI. They've taken shots at that, and it's, not quite there. There's a reason humans are what we are.
Yes.
But that is, I think, the difference, and I think that becomes a frustration with people is that AI has flaws in it, and there's not a real good way to overcome it. And that gets into the whole argument of, well, I'm going to run the same play until you stop me. Well, okay. I mean, if you want me to make 16 hot routes on defense, I can do that, but there's got to be some give and take there. The counter give and take there, I'm not sure is in Madden yet. And I'm not sure there's a ton the developers can do. And I feel for the developers at that point that if there's AI, there's going to be, exploits to the AI. And if there's exploits to the AI, people are going to find it and they're going to continuously use it.
Yeah, well, on that point, this year there actually is a bit better adaptive AI in terms of play calling. I experienced that myself, that if you run the same play, depending on the difficulty, consecutive times or too many times within a game, they'll actually come out in a defense that is prepared for it. So that's something that's really cool because of direct concept counters that the defense now has. Now, you could say that, well, how the hell would they know that I'm running this play? Sometimes that'll happen where you run a play for the first time and they have a direct concept counter to it. It's like, well, that might be a good guess, or they know your formation or whatever. Maybe they know your tendencies. But there are ways to counter it. The only thing is that, like you said, unless you're facing another person, they might not gamble the same way. And that's partly true, partly not in this year, where when you have those direct concept counters and you have 20 different zones or whatever, it's 13 different zone types, they'll actually play the ball differently. They'll play different routes differently. They'll do various things to counter them. So you'll throw a lot more interceptions if you try to do the same play over and over again. The only thing I'm a little bit concerned about is that if you test vertically, I think even in one-on-one, one-on-two situations, unless they go for the SWAT, and I don't know if the computer's designed well enough to go for that SWAT consistently, you're going to haul in a lot of passes. So I think that's something that definitely needs to be tuned from my time experiencing it, but I think it will be come launch. I think they know very well that that's an issue, and they'll make that a little bit more, a little bit harder, because if you try throwing between that 5 and 12-yard mark, you're in for a really rough time against zone coverage this year. But if you go like that 12 to 20, you could be in a really good sweet spot at the moment. And that's probably the toughest throws to make in the NFL because of distance and velocity. But at the same time, the defense isn't always prepared for it. So I think it depends on a lot of different factors to it. But I know I got a little bit away from your point, but that was those were my takeaways on at least the defense being adaptive, and that the money plays, while they work in real life and in the game, both of them now have counters, at least to some extent.
So, and this is something I haven't gotten to talk to anybody that's touched the game. We had some guys go out there. I'm not sure anybody really thought about it, but the adaptive AI, right? So it says, hey, you run 4 verts. I've seen you do this. I'm going to counter. But does it take into account for hot routes? Guys can basically remake the same plays through hot routes, and my concern is they're not going to see that same adaptive AI to the guy that recreates plays through those hot routes. You can recreate strong flood through hot routes. And so whether my play started off as slants, is the computer going to counter slants and not strong flood once I make that adjustment? And that's where I think the hole is going to end up being this year, is it's going to be in guys building plays through hot routes rather than repeating the same play.
I think that'll be an issue against computers. If you're facing a computer, then that's just, you shouldn't be doing that to begin with, right? If you're facing a computer, you shouldn't be trying to cheat them by doing 30 different hot routes, right? That's just the normal thing. And if someone's doing that, well, then that's on them. They're not hurting anybody, right? But if you're facing other people, if you know that they like to run that flood play, then you can just prepare for that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's always interesting. As far as the user versus computer argument, I think obviously you're one guy controlling 11 guys, so there's you can put a backside crosser on anything to make do. That goes into the deeper issue, I think, with with the community at times, is we're not interested in playing football. We're interested in winning games and breaking coverages. But
yeah,
before we go down that rabbit hole, because we could probably do an hour on
just
that
yeah.
itself. I kind of wanted to switch it up just a little bit here, and I want to talk about you for a second here.
Okay.
Hey, it's always good to talk about you, right? So you've got a very popular YouTube channel. I suggest everybody go check that out. One of the things you do is kind of a follow-along CFM type setup. I think you are the San Francisco 49ers this year, correct?
Yes.
And that's gained a lot of popularity. What do you think? Why do you think that's so popular?
Well, first off, I made a very crucial mistake when I started the series. I'm not a fan of Colin Kaepernick, and I didn't think that he would be the solution for San Francisco going into the season. And obviously I was right, because he got benched for Blaine Gabbert, but I traded him at the very start of the franchise for Bryce Petty. I traded for Bryce and a fifth, I think, for Colin Kaepernick. And I lost a lot of people at that very starting point, especially 49ers fans who wanted to see, or people just want to see Colin Kaepernick. So from that perspective, I made a mistake early, and I've recognized that I'm not going to make a mistake like that again. I'm just going to kind of roll through the roster year one and see what I can do. But I think people enjoy the series because I try to make it as realistic as possible, right? One of the things that I do, even just scheduling wise, I came up with a schedule back before the NFL season started. I made it every Wednesday and Saturday for the games. And my reason for that was very simple. You get football Thursdays, Sundays, and Mondays, but you miss it on Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday, unless you are a fan of college football, which not everybody who watches the NFL is, including myself. So I said, you know what? You get the NFL twice, 3 times a week. Let me give it to you 5 times a week. I'll give it to you on days that you don't normally get it. So this is a way that on days when you're looking forward to the NFL, if your team is sucking, especially if you're a 49ers fan, if your team isn't doing well, then come watch, and this will be a nice little what's the word? A substitute, I guess, for the actual NFL season for you, as just an aside that you can kind of follow along with your team, watch the players progress, and even though they're not actually doing it on Sundays, you could say they're doing it on Saturdays because I'm actually doing it. And I think that was just kind of the goal, that I want it to be a way for people to enjoy the NFL when the NFL isn't on. And I try to make it as realistic as possible, and while I've done, I think, a good job with that this season, there are areas that I definitely need to improve upon, but I already have all that taken down in notes and areas that I'm ready to pursue in Madden 17 that, I mean, I've been planning for my Madden 17 franchise since mid-May, so.
So speaking of that,
Yes.
you are releasing your team here in a couple days, I guess about a week, right?
Yes, on July 1st.
July 1st. So can we get a little hint here? You don't have to give it away. Maybe AFC, NFC? Do we know yet?
I'll give you, let me see.
Throw me a bone.
Let me pull up my list, because I actually made a list for my patrons because they already know. I do that thing where I have a Patreon channel or a Patreon page, and I like to give them stuff a little bit early, right? You know, just give them the idea to they'll learn things, they'll have ways to contribute, and that's part of the incentive of being there for $5 a month. Plus, they get a whole new series. They get a Lions franchise 2 months early in comparison to the rest of my viewers. But here are the teams that were on my list. And let me see. They're not in alphabetical order, but I'll read them to you in alphabetical order. These are the teams that I'm considering, or I was considering for my Madden 17 franchise. Chicago Bears, Cleveland Browns, Indianapolis Colts, San Diego Chargers. Sorry, Chargers come before Colts. Miami Dolphins, Baltimore Ravens, and New Orleans Saints. Those are the 7 teams that are on my list.
A little bit of a glutton for punishment there, aren't you?
I don't like using good teams. They bore me.
Well, that is completely understandable. Cleveland is interesting for the sheer fact that they just won a title, so you're gonna ride that interest. I think that you got RG3 there, you got a couple things going on there. Hugh Jackson.
Yeah,
I'm a Bengals fan, so that's Hugh Jackson's the man.
I love Hugh Jackson, but one of the things is about the Cleveland Browns, they're actually one of the lowest on my list. And the reason for that is, first off, one of the reasons they're on my list. One, they are a team that I support. They're not my favorite team. I'm a Patriots fan. I've been a Patriots fan all my life. But I became a supporter of the Browns back in 2007. I watched them in a game against the Bengals, actually, and they lost, but they put up a pretty good fight. And I said, this is a really young, scrappy team. They're the youngest roster in the NFL. And I was like, you know what? This is a really interesting team. I know they have a terrible history, but, whatever. So here was my reasoning for even considering them on the list. And this is a little insight into how I actually picked my team. It's on a scale of 1 to 10. 10 being great, 1 being terrible. As in 10 being great for incentive to use. Their offensive roster is a 6 out of 10. They have no defined players outside of some offensive line and Gary Barnidge. On defense, it's a 9 out of 10. Joe Hayden plus Danny Shelton, but the rest could be considered replacement level. So that's really cool. Cap situation is a 1 because they have so much cap room that it's almost a detriment to my idea for a series. Other good bads, they have a lot of rookies from this draft. They have 14 rookies. But the issue is that players may not develop well enough to warrant usage because they start at such a low overall. So that's my thinking when I look into a team, and my overall rating for the Browns was a 7.5 out of 10 as incentive wise. Anything I only included teams on that list that were over a 7. So the idea is that if I'm going to be using a team, I want the rookies to be impactful. I don't want them to just kind of sit by the wayside. But because they drafted so many players, they're going to have to be lower overalls for some of them, even if they'll be good impact players in real life. And I feel like when you have that many players, you can't put really enough attention into those specific players to make them progress at a realistic level. So.
Right, and that's interesting. So a couple years ago, obviously when XP was much higher, you probably could have developed them all. And we've seen the developers tone that down, and obviously there was a little bit of concession there, adding the slider back in. That's a good kind of segue into a question I had about the game prep.
Yes.
So,
oh God, it's going to be so good this year.
Let's talk about that a little bit, because
Yes.
this was something that I'd kind of thrown around with shop months ago, and I was excited when they did something very similar to the way I wanted it done. And that is, let's talk about what your opponent does, and let's actually make game prep useful for the preparation of the next game. So can you get into a little bit about game prep and your kind of thoughts just from touching it for, X amount of hours?
Okay, so first off, it's game planning this year. So that's get game prep out of your vocabulary. It's nothing like it. Okay, so that's a good thing. Game planning is, well, let's see. First off, the idea that it's based on opponents' tendencies, I really like it, but the one issue is that the computer will not play exactly the way that their tendencies say. The tendencies are based on simulation, and the computer, when you play, is based on difficulty and a lot of other factors. So it's not useful from the idea that this is completely preparing for them. They do have their own unique style to them, like every NFL team does in the game, even though some feel a little bit similar, especially as coaches change and whatever, because I think it's tied to the coach, not the team, which would make sense.
Right.
But you get boosts based on the drills you do. When you use those plays again, you get like a +1 boost to either a set of attributes when you use those plays, and it'll show up that you've practiced this play, so you're going to get an advantage in that next game, which is really cool. They added something from UFC, which I really like, where if you complete a drill, if you get any medal on a drill, anytime you want to do that drill from now on, you can just hit the square or you can hit the X button on Xbox, and you can simulate it at that level. So if you got a gold medal, you never have to play that drill ever again. You can just simulate it each week, and you'll get the boost for it. So that expedites the process tremendously, right? Players will get XP based on their position, based on their development. So if you're doing cover 2 man under as your drill, then your starting 2 corners will get a tremendous amount of XP. If you have a third corner on the field, then they're going to get XP as well at that same level, just changed based on their development. And anyone else on that depth chart who's not on the field right there will still get XP. They just won't get as much. So that's one way to develop those younger players, that if they're not in those drills, they're still going to be getting something, which I think is really cool. And then you have the focus training, which is literally, you go in and based on their development, you focus train them, and they get anywhere from, I think it was 200 to 500 XP per week.
So it's almost a compromise to the complaints about the XP. So you can actually develop a whole team at once rather than just having to focus on a single person.
Correct. And it might be slower for those guys who are on the bench, but that's understandable, right? If they're not on the field for those training drills, they're still experiencing them, they're watching it, but they're not actively participating, I guess would be the way to put that. So some players, I don't know if it's universal, that I think something like backup quarterbacks might get similar XP to the starter. I'm not positive. I can't fully speak on that. I feel like that was something that happened, but I don't know if that was a bug or if that was intentional or if I'm even remembering it correctly. But It's things like that, and the focus training is really cool. Plus, they have the XP sliders.
Right.
So if you feel like you're not getting enough XP in the game, then you can just bump that up, and you're fine. But I think one of the biggest things that happened this year is you no longer really need to concern yourself with upgrading development. And I think that was one of the biggest draws for getting XP, right?
Right.
So I think that now, if you perform well, you don't have to worry so much about that you can put those into more beneficial categories. And then, of course, there's the edit player feature. So if you don't feel like your guy's upgrading fast enough, and if you want to go completely off the grid and just put your guy up to 99, you can. But if you want to be a little bit more realistic and you want to put storylines into play and whatever, then you can adjust things slowly in attributes. Physical attributes and things like that.
So that brings up kind of the last topic I want to hit on here, and you've been great, and I don't want to take too much of your time.
I'm having fun, I'm good.
Cool. Good. Well, then we'll keep you on for a while then.
Okay.
That edit player option,
Yes.
and you're a game changer. So they showed you this, I'm guessing, at the early advanced screening even before EA Play, and we don't
Yes.
have to get into details, but that to me is a very scary idea. And I understand, yes, it'll be noted in the logs that something was done. But from when you look at the community and you look at these leagues, and all leagues are created differently, and the administration that runs the leagues are different. But it seems like you're going to have a lot of fallout this year. And I think that will be the culprit that kills a lot of CFMs this year. Mainly because what will happen is one guy will get something changed and it'll start a cascading effect. And then there'll be favorites played. And I just think from a community standpoint, once you've opened up Pandora's box like that, it's going to be very hard to put it back away.
Yeah and no. First off, only commissioner, I believe, can edit player.
Right.
So that's a great check right there. But secondly, I think I'd rather have the options than not. If people can't be grown up enough to not screw with each other's teams, then whatever. They were going to do things anyway to cheat the system however they wanted to. They would be the same type of people who would throw for 7,000 yards and run for 140 in a season and have one guy with 35 touchdown receptions. So I feel like the people who would do that to begin with probably would have found a different way to make their league toxic. So I think it just gives more options to those who are going to do it right and to those who want to have more fun. It's frustrating watching a group of players that you are trying to develop. Like in my 49ers franchise, I have a wide receiver who has 4,900 yards in 4 seasons or 5 seasons. So he's getting about 1,000 yards a season. He's an 83 overall. And the reason is because his spectacular catch is an 85. And it's too expensive for me to upgrade. So he's not going up in overall. And it's just like, well, this guy is playing at a level that's like 95. And he's an 83. So you know what contract he wanted? He wanted like a 4-year deal for like $20 million. I looked at it like, this is, oh God. But you know what? If I was in the realm of Madden 17, I'd bump up that spectacular catch to match what he's actually doing. Make sure that he actually wanted a contract that he was deserving, or I would do the very simple approach and I would bump up his overall to a point where I felt his contract would equal what he is playing at, and then lower it back down once he signed that contract.
So that kind of leads to where I was really wanting to get with that. Is this a duct tape approach by the developers to fix things that they either can't or really aren't sure how to fix within the game?
I would say that one of the biggest feedback things that we gave was people will never be happy. Ever. You could get 500 people who love how the game is played, and you can get 400 that don't. And it's the same way with anything. It's why there's 600 different slider sets, and it's why there are so many options that are given to you in Madden Ultimate Team and things like that. It's the idea that people will never be satisfied, and there will always be someone who's unhappy. So by doing this, you're appeasing everybody, right? It's like in MLB The Show, as an example. I hated the way that the trade system has been. The way the actual trade finder is awesome, but the amount of trades by the computer is ridiculous, and the timing is awful. And they put in a trade frequency slider. Now, I still have to adjust that, but you know what? Some people might find that that slider doesn't need to be touched. Some people might find that it needs to be off. Some people might find that it needs to be tuned up. It's really preference, and it's also the amount of awareness someone has about the sport, about the game, their age, the intents of why they're playing. If someone wants to do a rebuild, then you want your guys to grow a little bit faster. If someone wants to do, Tom Brady, they want to use Tom Brady and they're a huge Patriots fan, they could make him 22 years old and have him for the next 15 years. So
yeah, I mean that's a fair point, but the timing, you've got to admit, is very. It's almost too perfect considering some of the issues they've had the last year or two with regression. The speed regression, especially some older guys that are practically unusable. Offensive linemen having faster speed than some of the older wide receivers. To say that, you've got to admit, it almost seems like they're saying, we don't know how to fix necessarily all the issues we have, but what we'll let you do is you guys can fix them yourself.
It's possible, but at the same time, they addressed regression and progression this year. Or they addressed regression very heavily this year. We're not going to see guys dropping 5 speed points per year. It's not happening.
Yeah, I think they said 3, something like 3 is the max this year.
I think it's 2, and it's only at a threshold of age. Okay. So, but that's realistic, and that's another thing. People will not be happy with realism. Some people will love it, some people hate it. Some people will be upset that their 36-year-old running back is a 72 speed. But in real life, guys fall off a cliff when they turn 29, 28 at running back. Their production drops by about half every year for like 3 or 4 years, and then they're gone. So one of my friends actually posted a chart on that yesterday. It was something along the lines of a running back who is 33 years old averages 133 yards in a season. 133 yards in a season for an age 33 running back.
Right. That's up there a ways. I think the biggest issue with the receivers was the game got to a point that it was so speed dependent that, Larry Fitzgerald can still get open. And he's not running a very fast 40 anymore today. But there's other ways they get open, whether it's, perfect route running, timing, just being smarter than the guy, knowing how to break off a route. Whatever it may be, it was there. The game didn't really offer that, and I think that's where that frustration came from. But the slider thing and the attributes are something that I think it's a double-edged sword. I think, if you're going to give them the ability to edit everybody, people are going to ask for the ability to edit everything in the game now. So let me tone down aggressive catch. Let me turn up, you really start digging in on some of these things that it once again, slippery slope. And this kind of comes full circle back to the start of what we talked about at the very beginning.
Yeah.
My take, the community doesn't know what they want, and your take is you're not going to please everybody. And it is both true, I think, to an extent. And so, it's that bigger issue of the gaming community. They want it all. They want everything to work.
And they want it now.
They want it now, and they want it exactly the way they want it. And so, it's a game for a lot of different demographics. You've got the sim guys, you've got the competitive guys, you've got the people who play Ultimate Team more for the collecting of cards than the actual gameplay themselves. It's such a wide spanning group of people. I think that may be the biggest obstacle for the developers to overcome, because they've created a game that's really multiple games within a single game.
Yeah, I think that's really the best view on it. That it really is three, four, five different demographics in one. And when you have that, it's even harder to please everybody than if you had just one demographic who has different viewpoints. So, aside from the fact that football is possibly the hardest sports video game to actually program, just because there's so many intricacies in how football is played, that it's a very tough situation to be in. So, I think they do a pretty good job with it. I don't know if people will want the ability to tune down gameplay mechanics, because I think that's something that will never happen in terms of an option. But I do think that making edit player more accessible and being able to do something like that, especially because that's for franchise mode only, in that regard, I think that's actually probably a much better thing than not. Because if you still do play now, if you do Madden Ultimate Team, if you play online, it's still the normal guys the way that they are. But if you want to have a franchise experience, why not make it a little bit more customizable?
Yep, and that is the key. It's catering to each individual group the best they can, and I for one think the developers have done a great job with it. That's about all the time we have there. And I'm gonna have to bring you back on because there were some other things in there I wanted to touch on, but I can't give them everything all at once. I got to make those people come back and listen to us again sometime. So
That's fair.
Make sure you guys come back and check us out. You want to go ahead and plug your YouTube and Twitch there?
Yeah, I mean, I don't stream enough to plug the Twitch, but I'll do my YouTube. YouTube.com/MoonlightSwami. Pretty simple. Just it's going strong. And Madden 17, the way I have everything planned out, it'll be the best Madden franchise or best Madden series ever put on YouTube. That's my goal. So.
Well, I look forward to watching it. I'm sure everybody else does. Make sure you guys subscribe here to NBL Network. We'll have some more great content for you here throughout the summer, heading up into 17 and through 17. Also, make sure to follow us on Twitter at Bomber League. Once again, I want to thank MoonlightSwami for coming on, and I look forward to having you back.
Thanks for having me, and I look forward to being back.
All right. Thanks, guys, and we will see you next week.